Hello, everyone out there in podcast land. Welcome to Gray 17, a Babylon 5 podcast. We are here today not to talk about Babylon 5. We're here today to talk about Star Trek Picard, Season 3, Episode 5, Imposters. I am Scott, and with me is...
Blake.
Emily.
And I'm going to start out, because I think this is the episode where we need to say this the most until we get to Episode 6. And that is... huge spoiler warnings. If you have not watched episode 5, stop, go watch it, because we are going to spoil stuff, and it is a episode where you do not want to be spoiled first. So I'm going to give you to the count of 5 to leave. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ro comes back and she dies. Okay, let's talk, guys.
First, wow, Scott,
I counted it out. I counted it out. If you did not leave, I'm sorry. Okay, let's talk about first impressions. Emily, first impressions on this episode.
I liked it. There's a lot going on. So this one's going to take a few rewatches to try to catch everything, because there is just so much. But we did get a decent amount of information with this one, but that also leads to a lot more questions about what's really going on.
Are your trust issues coming?
So many. It just made them worse.
Blake, what's your impressions on Imposters?
So I really like this episode. It was a bit of a roller coaster ride. You know, there's several things in here. You've got Raffi stabbing Worf, which, you know, the first few seconds of that scene, I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, did they just kill off a legacy character? Because they'd commented in some of the pre-release from the series that nobody was safe. So, you know, that scene, I'm just thinking, did they really just do this? And then with the return of Ro and that whole story arc, the other part I really like with this one, you know, season 2 of Picard, we really saw the exploration of Picard and his family. And really, it seems like in this season, we're exploring more of Picard's relationships with those around him and how his actions, whether by his own will or not, have impacted others within this universe. You've got, you know, the role of Picard / Locutus with Shaw. You've got his relationship with Beverly leading to how Jack was handled. You've got his relationship with Ro. So you've got all these explorations of Picard and his relationships with others.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. This is the best one of the batch so far. And again, for those who don't know, Blake, Emily, and I have seen through episode 6. So we got one more week until you've all caught up with us. But this is definitely one of the big ones. And this was the oh shit moment when I was watching this, so one of the oh shit moments, and then Blake, I know you texted me and said, whoa, Ro. And so, of course, this is the Ro episode. And Blake and I were joking last night that our friends over at Trek Culture put out the 10 most misused or, underused. Not underused characters. And number 1 was Ro Loren. And I'm like, well, that's going to age real well. But here we are. And the episode starts out with my favorite guy in this season, which is Shaw, being Shaw-like. And I love that. We'll talk about that. And yeah, I think the title is really means a lot here. Imposters. Obviously, it's referring to the changelings. It's referring to Jack and what's going on with him. But it's also referring to how people present themselves and how our characters are seeing everybody now that there's the changelings in the mix. Is Ro a changeling? Well, Ro is trying to figure out, is Picard a changeling? What's going on with Worf and Raffi? Did Worf really want to start this fight? And of course, obviously we know he didn't, and he had a plan, but it's all these like little bait and switches that we get throughout the episode of who's doing what and why are they doing it. And it really does, as Blake, you said, builds the tension. And I really enjoyed that. So let's dive in. And I think the crux of the episode is the plot on the Titan and the inclusion of now the Intrepid, as well as the Starfleet intelligence. So let's talk about that a little bit and what your guys' thoughts are on that entire plot that was the big piece of the episode. Let's leave Jack out of it for now. I think Jack can be a side area, but let's talk about the Titan, Ro, Picard, all of that.
Well, I will say, and I'm going to knock one little bit of criticism here, is I did not like the look of the Intrepid. I know that's not to the plot, but...
You mean the USS Kitbash?
Like an upside-down phaser with a saucer and some nacelles slapped on it. So I will say, I'm going to ding that just as a little comment that I thought that was probably one of the dumber-looking ships. Since Discovery, the pizza cutter looking one.
The USS Kitbash is what I put in my notes when I saw it.
Yeah.
Folks are going to say that, oh God, they're doing it again, but we promise, wait till next episode. It will be fine. There are other ships. We promise. This one's not one you want to have on your desk. It's okay.
But with the overall plot with the Intrepid and having Ro come in, I just think it was well done. The only slight catch for me in it was when Ro was giving the backstory of turning herself into Starfleet and, going on trial, being put in prison. The only part for me is Picard would have been in a position, he would have known that. So because considering he was in the command where she kind of went away and did everything, somewhere he would have heard that, oh, by the way, we've captured Ro Laren and she's in prison. I'm just saying somewhere along the way, Picard either would have been a witness at that or known about it somewhere along the way. So that, to me, is a little bit of a gap. But I get, you've only got so much time, and they're moving at such a clip with this. It's not a huge deal by any means. But how they brought Ro back, and especially the exchanges between her and Picard, I mean, you got into... This was someone who was Picard looked at as a mentee, someone he wanted to be a mentor to.
A daughter.
A daughter figure, exactly. And I kind of got that same bit of almost going back to Star Trek VI. We've reckoned this back to this is the undiscovered country for next gen, but it was that same kind of thing with Spock and Valeris, that Valeris was intended to succeed him, and she ultimately betrayed him. Now, this takes the story further to the redemption of Ro Laren from her actions in next gen. But I also think this calls out some of the criticism we've had with Next Generation of it could be so high-minded on principle sometimes that it would overlook some of the other issues. Ro thought she was fighting for what was right for the Bajoran people against the Cardassians, but others never saw that.
There's a lot to unpack there, Blake. Let me unpack some of it. First, yeah. I don't see what you see as a plot hole because I'm going to allow for the fact that we know Picard has basically checked out for at least 10 years. And I'm going to guess that she was with the Maquis and then likewise for a while. So I'm going to let them off a hook and say this probably happened when Picard just wasn't really where he is in terms of being captain or admiral. Yes, we probably could have had a little bit more in depth than that, but you're right. I mean, it's a quick episode and she gets one episode and we have to move along. Now, what I love about these interactions with Ro and Picard is it again shows us Picard's biggest flaw, and it's always been his biggest flaw, and that is he has an insane amount of loyalty, and if you fail that loyalty, he loses a lot of respect for you, and also he has an obsessive personality. We saw this specifically in First Contact, obviously the Moby Dick thing, but when he gets pissed off at you, he stays pissed off at you. And I liked seeing that. It was the same kind of thing with him in his ready room in First Contact, just losing it. And here, he doesn't really want to listen to Ro because of what she did to him. But to Blake, to your point, it's a redemption for Ro. I see it as a redemption for Picard. Even Riker points out, you knew you were putting her in a place where she was going to fail you. You knew she was going to feel empathy for them. Why did you put her in that position? And he never answered that question. But he set her up for failure as much as she failed him.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that too.
Emily?
So I get the gap you're talking about. Like, if he was still actively like a captain, admiral, he might know what's going on with her. But I saw it as him trying to confirm she is who she says she is. Like, they know they're changelings. So the lack of the earring and really pushing her on, for someone who joined the Maquis, how are you here now? Like, yeah, he might have had that information, but really trying to get to her who she is, like, as a person that he would recognize, to confirm, because they are in a situation where things are weird,
Thank you for adding to my headcanon. I appreciate it. Thank you.
What, things are weird?
No, that's exactly what I'm. For now, my headcanon is Picard knew, and he was trying to test her. That's my headcanon. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. I do what I can.
Fill those plot holes for me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was how I viewed it, because he knows there's changelings. There's all this really strange stuff going on, and they show up on a shuttlecraft, which isn't the norm. And she's very cool with him. Like, there's like that wall of ice. So it's kind of like, okay, is that, like, how do I maneuver around this to try to confirm it's actually her? And then maybe release some of the stuff he's been holding in for a few years or decades, once he figures out that, yeah, that really is her.
I love that it happens at gunpoint. They both escalated to where, if you don't answer this the way I want you to answer it, I'm going to blow your frickin' head off. And that is where they would be. These two people, because of situations and circumstances, hate each other. But they still love each other, too, and you see that. And I have to say, even though she doesn't get much screen time, unfortunately, because, well, she did now, but Michelle Forbes has always been an excellent actor, and the look she gives, Blake, Emily, we've talked about this a couple times with the parts of the script where they don't use any dialogue, and they just let the actors act. And after they put the guns down, and Picard says what he says to her, and I'm blanking on what he said at the moment, but her face, it just... To your point, Emily, the ice wall comes down, and you can see the pain in her face. And then Picard says, judging by the pain we're feeling, I guess we can both say that we're who we say we are. It was a great scene. That 10 forward bar is, again, a lot of good scenes this season.
It is.
It really is.
So let's...
Holodeck has a power supply.
So let's move on to... the main point of this, and that is that Starfleet has been compromised. How much we don't know, but it seems like a lot. We hear about 12 different incidents on other ships. Ro doesn't even trust the captain of the Intrepid. And obviously we find out that's completely true, because the Intrepid starts trying to take them out by the end of the episode, and of course Rose sacrifices herself. So let's talk more about that and what this means as implementations for this going forward.
Well, one thing that came to mind as I was watching the whole changeling plot with this one, and they were
talking
about, as they were doing the autopsy on the one that assumed LaForge's identity, and we're talking about how that had a blood-like plasma, even though there was no DNA in it, and they had to cut it into such small pieces to get it to revert to the goo phase. I was actually reminded back to DS9 with Paradise Lost, when Sisko was at his father's restaurant because they were trying to do the blood test. And his dad starts out on this whole thing about, if I was a really smart changeling, I would go find some human and absorb every drop of its blood and squeeze it out on demand.
Yes.
That just came back to, I'm like, did they figure out a way? And even Beverly says, this is evolution. Did they figure out a way to get around the security measures to do this? And it looks like that's kind of the case. So it just kind of brought that scene back from, Paradise Lost for me, watching that one.
I'll add a little bit to that real quick before you go to your next point. I also love, because another bit of a plot hole that we had a couple episodes ago was, there's a changeling about. Why aren't you using the tried and true phaser scan method that DS9 had? And they mentioned it today, and then in this episode. We scan everyone who comes onto the ship because of the Dominion War. So we don't need to do the phaser sweeps anymore. We scan everybody. I love, again, that little touch where we know the fans are going to ask this question, so let's answer it for them. It took a couple episodes that time, but I love that they do stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Because they fill those little bits as they go, but then, and to your point, we see with the Intrepid, they put most of the crew over onto the Intrepid, but there's four different changelings at least in this episode 5, if you count the one that was dead at the start.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you've got 5 changelings, 4 of which came from the Intrepid, all showing up here. And they clearly try to take Ro out because they figure out something's up with Ro.
And you got to wonder when they actually figured that out. I mean, obviously, there's tension on the Intrepid because she doesn't want to use the transporter because he'll probably just transport her into space or whatever, leave her in the buffer for a while. But so I think they're already onto him. And also, too, you notice when those 2 changelings leave the observation room, ready room, whatever that is, that they click again. Much like the ones that click on the bridge too, because there's been some conversations on the online forums and stuff that are the aliens on the Shrike, not Vatic, but the other ones, are they changelings? Well, they're all clicking together. I don't know what that means, but they're all clicking.
Yeah, that was when Dr. Crusher commented it was evolution. I really have to question if it's evolution because the time frame in which it would have happened is short. Not saying impossible because obviously different, like genetics and stuff, but it feels much more like genetic manipulation than a true evolutionary process. Like this was designed to be this way so they could better mimic humans and get past all these to infiltrate.
Well, and that's just what the Dominion does, right? I mean, they uplifted the Vorta. They created the Jemadar. They're used to this stuff.
Oh, and I had another thought on that. Where the hell's my note? Yeah, the intentional alterations. And then I'll come back to it if I remember. But that was, I really don't feel like it's an evolutionary thing. I feel like this was very much intentional to better create a disruption.
Can we at least agree that I'm very happy that Dr. Oak is just now subservient to Crusher? Because every time Oak tried to put Crusher in her place, it pissed me off. And this time Oak doesn't say a word. She's like, "Yeah, boss, I'll just follow your lead because you're right."
Well, I think she recognizes just the level of experience that Dr. Crusher has had with all the
weird shit
they were in, when they were all on a crew together, and her experience is much more vast.
Well, with that sick base, I will say too, is one of the scenes I loved in this episode was all the time you see him talk to Starfleet officers, and they have the stoic, we are Starfleet, we don't get phased by things. And, when Crusher says, "For the record, can you please, Ensign LaForge, say that this is not you?" LaForge just runs off screen and throws up.
She's had some kind of cringy moments with my dad's Geordi LaForge, but that was just fun. I enjoyed that one a lot. I think I can see some people saying, to your point, Blake, well, that's not very Starfleet of her. It's funny.
It's
Go
funny.
with it.
It worked.
It's funny.
Well, I mean, honestly, if someone opened up a blanket and you're laying there dead with a phaser shot...
Yeah.
You might do that.
Like, great.
And just that deadpan at the end. Let the record show she indicated yes.
I continue to say it, Gates McFadden is getting to chew more scenery and do so much acting in this season than she had in 7 years of TNG, except for a couple episodes, and any of the movies. She's getting so much to play with. It's great. So, of course, we got to talk about the elephant in the room, which is the fact that we bring back a legacy character who was one of the most popular characters in TNG. She was only there for a little bit, but she was absolutely one of the most popular characters, to a point to where she was going to be the front runner with Sisko on Deep Space Nine. The original script had Ro being first officer of DS9, and when Michelle Forbes decided she wanted to have a movie career, that didn't happen, and so we got Nana Visitor and Kira, which, don't get me wrong, I'm so glad we got that, but Ro's a big thing, and you bring her, and to Blake, to what you said, no one's safe, you bring her onto the board, and then you wipe her off the board really quickly. How do you guys feel about that?
I'm glad it was the way it was, because it very easily could have been like a meaningless type thing.
Like falling off a bridge in Generations? What?
I wasn't going to mention the death of Kirk, but stay tuned. We'll address that later. But it had impact. There was something in the episode that she sacrificed herself, and it was the end, she flat said, to give you a fighting chance.
Yes.
She knew it was the only way to continue her investigation was to hand everything over to Picard, which I love that with the earring, by the way, when Riker goes into the old school spycraft and the whole investigation comes up. This was a great way, honestly, to tie the two plots together, which it does at that very end when, it's Worf that comes up on the screen. But her death in this had meaning. It wasn't just, here she is, and now we're going to kill her.
Yeah, I have to agree. And I thought it was nice how even after the history between Ro and Picard and how much trust was broken, that in the end there was still trust there. Like it hadn't been completely fractured to the point of never trusting again. But he was still able to trust her, and she was, willing to put her life on the line to help him.
And not only to help him, to defend Starfleet, who had thrown her to the wolves twice. But at the end of the day, she decided that her loyalties lie with Starfleet, and she's going to defend it with her dying breath. I think that says a lot about Ro as well, too. Again, as much as Picard is big on loyalty, Ro's big on loyalty, too. She always had been. It's just that her loyalties were divided until now. Anything else you guys want to talk about the Titan? The one thing I want to hit on real quick before we move on is, God, I love Shaw. He has two amazing scenes once again. First one, in the observation room. I'm just going to walk out and let you guys get your bullshit stories straight. And, that's actually him helping them. He's saying, hey, we've got a rapport. I'm still going to turn your asses in, but I'm going to let you try to get out. Shaw wouldn't have done that until now.
Yeah. But I will say, though, and my thoughts on this one scene changed after we did the interview with Todd Stashwick.
Yes.
So, because the first time around, I watched the turbo lift scene and thought, okay, funny, got it. But watching the interview we did with Todd Stashwick back and being part of that, and his personality through that whole interview, especially, as he's yelling at us, calling us bad nerds, and watching that scene again as we got ready for this, and, he's sitting there humming, and Picard just looks at him, do you mind? But the whole part about, hot dropping the saucer section, going the Baku villager, everything he runs through, and that, oh, by the way, almost wiping out humanity in the Devron system.
Which, by the way, that never actually happened. So I'm assuming Picard logged a report, because the Devron system never happened because it reset. I'm just throwing it out there if we're talking plot holes.
But just that bit at the end, because it's this idea, Riker's, we're heroes, we've saved the galaxy, and then Shaw sits there like for every view of Star Trek ever and goes, yeah, but a few of those times you've saved it from your own fuck-ups.
Well, and I think that says people were so dogging Shaw, and again, he's made some poor decisions. The whole Seven situation, I can't defend that. But people were like, well, he's treating these legends like assholes. To him, they're not legends. To him, it's like every time you guys save the galaxy is because you screwed it up to begin with. Every time. First Contact. Congrats. You went back in time and saved us from the Borg that you helped create.
Yeah.
Emily?
Yeah, I liked the scene in the turbo lift where they'll stand there and he's just humming. And it was actually interesting to see him like so close to Riker because there are quite a few similarities between the two. So I thought that was also really interesting.
What do you say when Picard, I forgot, when Picard said, do you mind? He's like, I'm just, what do you say, chipper?
Chipper.
Chipper, yes, I'm just chipper. Because your assholes are going to get in trouble. I'm chipper.
Oh, no, he said, I'm just chipper. Not because you two are going to get your ass handed to you, just chipper.
And to your point about Todd Stashwick's acting on this, as I think I mentioned during our interview, Terry Metalis has said over and over again, when they were in the writer's room putting this together, before they had casted anybody, Captain Shaw was in the script as Captain Stashwick because they wrote Captain Shaw for Todd Stashwick. And God, you're right. You can just see it. I will never stop singing the praises of Captain Shaw. And I gotta tell you, because we still got 4 episodes I haven't seen. If they do anything to harm a single hair on that man's head, I will riot. Because he must survive this show. He must survive. I need Captain Shaw in my life. Emily needs him more, but I need Captain Shaw in my life.
Wow.
Very true. Not wrong.
Anything else for the Titan, guys? Okay, let's move on over to Metalis Prime for the last time, I believe, and talk about Raffi and Worf.
Ooh. Yeah.
Okay, I'll jump. I was gonna.
Yeah, we're experiencing a lull.
So the first thing I will comment on, just watching as Worf and Raffi walk to their little meeting with Kryn, is they don't call it out first, but you see the mobile emitter on her arm.
Yes.
Yeah, seeing the Voyager mobile emitter on Raffi's arm, that they have brought that back and have started using that.
And it's like common knowledge now.
Yeah.
Kryn's like, you didn't think I knew you were going to use that? So it's common knowledge.
I thought it was an interesting setup, and that's a lot of trust to basically tell her, yeah, make it look like I'm dead, but don't actually kill me when, that, because that would be preferred. That's pretty risky.
But they didn't even say that to begin with. They just knew, they were in Sapatico, that they knew that, okay, neither one of us is doing this for real, but we have to show that we're doing it for real.
Right, and that's still a level of trust, because you gotta make it look real, but not make it real.
It's real enough to where we gut Worf for a bit. It's fine. It's just a flesh wound. It's fine.
And they had that little practice that, they were sitting there sparring on La Sirena, which, one thing I think it's interesting just to note on the sets for this, we've not seen the lower deck of La Sirena this season. And they've been very careful, even when panning around the main deck, that they're not showing down into the cargo hold or lower deck area of the ship. It's because it's the Shrike.
Yeah.
It's like that whole lower deck they converted, that is the set for the Shrike now. So they're being very careful that they're not panning down and showing, oh shit, there's the Shrike in the basement of the La Sirena.
Budget cuts. Well, I saw somebody on Facebook, I'm on a Next Gen group for obvious reasons, and somebody said, I noticed that the Galaxy Battle Bridge looks a lot like the Enterprise A, because it is.
It is.
And the Titan A looks a lot like the Stargazer, because it is. Budget cuts. So, Blake, you pointed this out to me, and I know you were watching 12 Monkeys now because I dragooned you into it. So let's talk about our good buddy Kryn.
Yeah, so Kurt Aceveda, this thing's turning into a 12 Monkeys reunion.
It is. I need Emily Hampshire to show up sooner or later for multiple reasons.
I'm just gonna say it. With the newer Star Trek, they have seriously upgraded the Vulcans and the Romulans.
They have.
Because I never remember them being this good looking in other series. I'm just saying.
Oh, you haven't. How far are you on 12 Monkeys?
Right towards the end of season 1.
Okay, you got plenty more of Kirk to go, so enjoy yourself.
I will. It's fine. Hey, Emily can get, Todd Stashwick yelling at us. I can get, hot Vulcans and Romulans. It's fine.
I do love how Acevedo plays Kryn, too, and just the writing of it. Like, how is a Vulcan being a criminological? And he's like, but,
Yeah.
ergo. I'm like, oh, you are so Spocking it right now. I love it. Speaking of Spock, Emily, your favorite character. Talk about the Vulcan.
I had mixed feelings about him. Yeah, I was really uncomfortable with an evil Vulcan being that attractive.
The ears are definitely more pointed than usual.
Yeah, and him having the criminal element and being like some level of criminal mastermind here, him actually giving up what was taken from Daystrom it felt like it came too easy, even if it was logical. Something about that just felt very conflicting to me. But I mean, he played the part amazingly.
Again, I can't sing the praises of this show enough. If you have not watched 12 Monkeys and you liking Picard season 3, like Blake said, this is just an extension of the stuff they did over there. The producers are the same, the composer's the same, a lot of the actors are coming back. It's a really good show, and Kirk, who plays Ramsey, is really, really good. Not Ramsey. How do you pronounce his name? Man. Thanks, Blake, for backing me up on that.
You're welcome. Sorry.
But
it was Ramsey also.
Is it Ramsey? Okay, it may be Ramsey. I need to go back and watch it again. But
I just wanted to yell at you for being the bad nerd and not the rest of us.
I know. So I also, he had a lot of scarring on his face. So again, to my headcanon, I'm just going to assume he had a pet Salat, and the pet Salat scarred him. And anyone who's watched the animated series, enjoy that reference. These guys don't enjoy the reference. Okay.
Sorry.
It's Spock's pet. Okay. What else we got? Anything else you guys want to talk about with this episode in general, or with Worf and Rafi? I'm really glad that, as we've started to see, we're getting the gang back together. Obviously, it seems like these two stories are going to potentially merge here fairly soon, which is nice. And we're getting finally off Metalis Prime, which that one set was pretty, but it's time to move on.
Well, and just to go back to again, I really did think the first go through that they had killed off Worf.
Yeah.
And they did that story so well that it really was the first time through a little bit of a surprise when all of a sudden, he starts offing the rest of Kryn's bodyguards that are there. Because they said at the start of this, nobody was safe. They've implied since the start that nothing was going to be safe, that they could off people or whatever. But the other part with the storylines coming together that I appreciated is it felt natural, the way that they merged the stories together through Ro's investigation. That Ro was their handler through Starfleet intelligence, and then that brought them back in with Picard and the rest, because one of the things that annoys me the most with Nemesis, well, amongst many things that annoy
There's many things that annoy me about Nemesis.
Many things that annoy me on that film. Or not Nemesis, Insurrection, I think it is actually. They get on the bridge and it's, Mr. Worf, what the hell are you doing here? And that's Insurrection.
Yeah, because Insurrection, like, they pan away. They don't even have him answer the question. He's like, well, I was blah, 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 and we move on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, what the hell are you doing? This was a much better way to bring Worf into the show, into the main storyline.
Which, to that point, because he mentioned it twice in this episode, I want to know, and I hope we learn, what has actually happened to Worf and what he has sacrificed to be a part of this as a subcontractor. Because in the beta canon, in the comic books, Worf was the captain of the Enterprise for a time. Obviously, if you're going with Alpha canon only, we know that Worf was told by Sisko he would never have a command, and then he went over to be the ambassador to Kronos with Martok. So I want to know what he has sacrificed and where he is as character at this character level. And I hope that's not just something they just threw out there as dialogue. I hope we actually find out, because Worf, as we've discussed before, he's the character who's been in the most Trek ever. And so a lot of people have a lot of ties to him. For me, I remember him most from Deep Space Nine. And I want to know what happened between the death of Jadzia, the leaving of DS9, and going to work with Martok. What has happened since then? I want to know that kind of stuff. And I hope we get that answered. We'll see.
So one thing I think we need to talk about is Jack Crusher, because honestly, that boy ain't right. There is something up with Jack, especially going ninja on 4 changelings.
And fantasizing about killing many people.
Yes.
Sooner or later, it's not going to be a fantasy, right?
But that opening one, though, that very first kind of hallucination / fantasy, when the one bridge officer looks at him and goes, I know what you really are.
Mm-hmm.
And it was even referenced again later. Whether it actually happened or was a hallucination, again, I think is open to interpretation. But Jack's in the corridor, and that same character walks by and looks at him.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is he hallucinating that this character looks at him again after the "I know what you really are," or was it just there's this random weird kid standing in the hallway?
He may just be very, very concerned and thinking everyone's looking at me weird. But yeah, I agree. There's definitely something going on there, and we got a little bit more of the voices in his head. Mm-hmm. Bring us together or connect us. I think it was connect us.
And come home.
Which, and
find me.
Find me. It definitely feels like he is some kind of sleeper. And I don't know what that means or not. But for me, on what I've seen up to this point, it definitely feels like he has been placed there for a reason. And it seems like, because we've heard that Vanek's crew has tried to get him several times, they're trying to bring him back to wherever he needs to go. And, I think, and this is completely and totally just my assumption with no evidence, I don't think it's the changeling part. I think the changelings are a cog in a different wheel, because it's too easy to go on the old, like, Odo was sent out and he was sent out with other changelings in order to learn more about the solids, and we're going to bring them home now. They've done that story. I think there's something else going here.
I was thinking the same thing, because that's too easy of a reference. And the one thing Terry Matalas has done with this is he's been very careful in what he's picked. And even within some of the misdirection that he's done with bits and pieces from the trailers and what we've seen in these episodes, I don't think he would insult the audience to go with something that blatantly obvious. Because as they said with the changeling thing, because I was thinking the same thing you mentioned, is the founder said, we sent, all of these changelings out into the galaxy to learn, to do this. And Odo said, well, how did you know we would ever come back? And the founder's response was, we programmed that in. We made sure that when we sent you out, which, again, to Emily's earlier point on genetic manipulation, clearly they can do this, because when they sent the founders like Odo out, they ingrained them with some type of knowledge to return home. That's such an obvious callback that I think Terry Matalas has set it up so that fans will sit there and go, I know what's going to happen. And it's not going to be that. It's just too obvious. I
agree. And I'm glad you referenced the trailer, because that was a big conversation point when that trailer came out. Was we did get the shot of Jack holding the gun, the phaser. And now we know that was in his head. But that trailer came out, a lot of people were saying, well, this Jack guy, well, they didn't even know it was Jack at the time. This guy seems to be one of the bads because he's doing something on the bridge. So they have definitely pulled that before, and I completely agree with you on that. I will say the one thing I hope is, even if my assumption is correct and he's some kind of sleeper, I hope at the end of the day he still is Picard and Crusher's son. I hope that is not waved away, because I think that is an important development, and I am hopeful that at the end of the day something happened to him between birth and now, not that he was, created to be this. We'll see. Emily, you got a smile on your face?
Yeah. Well, the first time I watched this, and because I sent you the message, was, what the fuck kind of sleeper agent is he? Because of the interaction and killing 4 changelings. And so I'm glad I was able to watch this again, because when he's in the med lab, or whatever you want to call it, talking to his mother, she is telling him, you used to have nightmares as a child. And so there's already a history of nightmares, but we don't know what they were. So were they similar, or were they different, like regular childhood nightmares? And we know he went to school in London. So did something happen to him at this school in London? Because if that's time away from her, things could happen. But I also brought up the question of the likelihood of fertility during the last episode, and how likely that might be.
You still thinking Picard's got ED? Come on now.
That is
Picard
not
fucks.
What I'm thinking. It's
Picard
not.
Fucks.
Good Lord, it's not about that part of it.
Well, and how many pervy old men have children with their trophy wives?
I think she's referring to Crusher, and I'm going to assume in 300 years women can bear children a little later in life.
Yeah, and we also don't know what sort of assistance they might need to do so, which is really where the question comes in.
Yeah, that's true. Because there was, I mean, based on the assumption of how they were explaining it, it was an oopsie. So there was no assistance.
Yeah, as far as if we can believe that. Trust issues.
Trust issues.
Yes.
But actually, I feel like something likely happened to him when he was away in London. That seems the most plausible. But his ability to figure out like who's a changeling is kind of suspect, because changelings did seem to have a sense to figure out, like, sense each other some way.
Yeah,
even in solid form, like they could sense it somehow, and that, like, I'm not saying he is a changeling, but that part just seems a little odd.
Yeah. I don't think he is. I don't think he's a changeling. I think he's something else. And I'm going to go back to our interview with Stephen Barton, who said he's watched the fan theories online and no one's gotten it yet. No one has put it together yet. So there is something else. The one thing I will throw out there, and this is, again, just me watching the shows and it's pure speculation, I still think there is something intertwined with the Enterprise C. And the reason why I say that is we keep getting a lot of references to the Enterprise C. Obviously, Rachel Garrett's statue. But in the last episode we watched, episode 4, it's just sitting there. And they zoom in on the Ambassador class gold little statue. I'm just like, why do you keep pointing out the Enterprise C to me? I don't think it's Sela. I think they would have telegraphed that a little bit more, but it could be. But there's something else that we have not seen yet, I believe.
I'm still wondering if there's any connections with season 2, because when we left season 2...
You mean season 2 of TNG or Picard? Because I'm thinking Dr. Pulaski now, and that's not going to happen.
No, season 2 of Picard.
Okay.
You have the weird Agnes Borg hybrid thing.
Yeah.
And they were protecting an anomaly.
I'm pretty sure everyone in the production room is like, let's just let that one go.
And I'm like, but if you go back to the episode that had Garrett, there was like that weird anomaly with time and shifting timelines. But that, like, it doesn't seem right, but who the hell knows?
I was watching an interview with the other main producer, not Terry Metalis. His name is Chris, and I'm blanking on his last name right now. I think it's Mehet, I believe, or Methet. Either way. And he was asked this very question, and he was being interviewed by fans of Picard Season 3 who have been very adamant they are not fans of quote-unquote New Trek. And they asked the question, is like, okay, how did you weave season 3 in with what was, in their opinion, terrible season 1 and season 2? And he said, look, we have to realize that even though you don't like season 1 and season 2, a lot of people did. So we do not want to make them feel like that didn't happen, but also we are telling our own story and we're moving in a different direction. So I'm going to assume, based on that, and based on the ill will that a lot of people have towards previous seasons, that we have had the last of Agnes and the Borg. And also, honestly, the Borg have been done. I want something new.
Yeah, and that, like, those were just like some odd connections, but it doesn't feel like it would fit the story. But I do find all those red, it looks like blood vessels when he's hallucinating. It looks like blood vessels.
I was also thinking, since Last of Us is big right now, it looks like the red fungus. But yeah.
I don't know.
I don't watch that. We'll see, though. I mean, it's interesting. To Blake's point, the boy ain't right, and something's up. But we still can't do our predictions yet, guys, because we are still one episode ahead of everyone else. But starting next week, we can do predictions. Go ahead.
And I will say, as just a prediction now that we can get away with, is
okay.
You mentioned the Enterprise. I'm with you. I think we're going to connect somewhere back to yesterday's Enterprise.
I think you have to at this point.
Yeah, there's just been too many because we've talked about the intentionality here. Everything they've put in has had an intentionality to it. You know, it's not just been gratuitous fan service. Or what is the memory berries is what they're called?
Memory berries, yeah. Thanks, South Park.
So I don't think you would have had a reference to the Rachel Garrett statue.
Yes.
Or a long shot of a model of an ambassador class for no reason.
I think so too. Well, I mean, I can be very much wrong, but of course, the easiest connection you can make, even though I said I don't think it's this case, is it could be Sela. It could be another character that was not used and actually was in that same Trek Culture video. It could be Sela coming back as well too, which Metalis has said, and again, I don't trust Metalis to tell us what's going to happen. I don't want him to, but he has said that Tasha Yar is referenced in the show, but that's it. But I can see Crosby coming back. I can absolutely see that, but I think they're going to go in a different direction. It'll be interesting to see.
Well, and they've kept the fact that we've talked about this was filmed a year ago. Yes,
and the fact that no one knew Ro was coming back. Michelle Forbes, that's a big deal. And we were shocked when we watched the screeners a month ago. And I'm also very, very happy that anyone who watched the press screeners kept it quiet too. We kept it quiet. Everyone kept it quiet because we all knew how important this was. And I'm actually going to tweet out about this too tomorrow night. We're recording this on Tuesday. Behind the scenes, I'm going to tweet out about this on Wednesday night. After you watch this episode, don't be a dick. Don't spoil this episode for people. Let them watch it first, because this is a big one. Don't be a dick.
Which again, if you're watching this at this point and are wondering why we just spoiled everything, we gave you fair warning at the start.
I did the countdown. So, anything else you guys want to talk about with Imposters before we move on to next week's episode, Bounty?
I think that's all I've got for Imposters that I can say anyway.
Exactly. Emily, what do you got?
Not for this one, no.
Okay. So that will be the end of this episode. If you have any theories, comments, ideas, put them in the chat below, and we will definitely chat with you on as we go on this too. And we're really looking forward to next week's episode. For one, I told you last week to bring tissues for this one. I'm not even going to say a word about episode 6 because I want you to just look upon it in awe and enjoy yourself. Because if you don't enjoy episode 6, there ain't no hope for you. Just enjoy. And then we'll be back here next week to talk about episode 6, Bounty. And then, guys, unless I can get Terry to send me some videos here before then, we are to a point where we can actually start making our predictions because we will be caught up with the rest of the audience. And I'm looking forward to that because I have been waiting for 2 months after that cliffhanger that everyone's going to have next week. So I'm looking forward to 2 weeks from now when I can start watching again and not have to wait for everyone else to catch up. So until... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, and as I say, since you mentioned we are recording this on Tuesday this time instead of our normal live on Thursday morning, we are going to set this as a premiere. So if you're watching this, do interact in the chat with us.
Mm-hmm. And hopefully you already have because it premiered an hour ago.
Yeah.
Surprise. So until next week when we talk about Bounty, or until, a few days from now when we talk Babylon 5, because we still do that too. I've been Scott, and with me has been
Blake.
And Emily.
And make sure to click on the linkies below and the subscribe and the thumbs up and the notify and all that good stuff. Thanks, everybody, and let's boldly get the hell out of here.